that's probably a byproduct. That's probably a byproduct of them not really having a full scope of the different types of transpersonal experiences that are possible. A lot of people that say, all there's this idea of perennial theory or perennialism, where all experiences will eventually lead to this unitive mystical experience. And so this experience, unitive mystical experience, comes from W.T. Stace and eventually Hood, who created this questionnaire, and this questionnaire is what's commonly used in some of the scientific studies. But unfortunately, there's a lot more. Something from the perspective of integration, if you're telling somebody, okay, well, everything leads to this one perennial experience, and they're like, well, wait, I don't want to talk about everything being blissful and positive in all one. I want to talk about these other nuances. So from the perspective of integration, it really makes sense to understand that there's a lot of different types of experiences and being open to hearing what these experiences might be, unpacking them, and those different types of things. So as I was saying earlier, I want to sort of expand, and this is one of my integrations right here. This is a sort of a deconstruction of myself. I painted this here, just kind of something I call it deconstructing spirit, right? So art integration is one way to work on this, and other different types of facilitation. So personal integration, this would be something that you're involved in. You're engaging in the process. You're working hard on sort of the personal and spiritual growth. There's the peer support element. This would be like a circle. This would be the circles I'll be talking about a little bit later. These are nice because you have a lot of different voices there. Whereas a one-on-one, for example, you can be a little bit, you may not try to do this, but anytime you're working only with one person, there's a process of editing that happens, personal process of editing that can happen. So when you have a peer support, you have 10 people in there, you can't really edit for the person in front of you. You just kind of gotta have to be raw, which is really great. Then, as I was saying, you have the one-on-one. You can do one-on-one in a variety of different ways. Then there's a psychotherapeutic dynamic, which is also one-on-one, which I'll talk to about in the next slide. Somatic therapy would be another way. That could be something like body work or working with somatic therapy. Maybe, it's interesting. This idea of somatic therapy is like, you hold trauma, you hold stuff in your body, and then the somatic therapist can help you remove that. Oftentimes, this is also, at least has been mentioned in some of the stories about the Shipibo, is that we're all, which worked for with ayahuasca, is that we're all these threads, right? And that the traumas or the sicknesses are knots in these threads. And the job of the ayahuasquero is really or the curandero is to really undo those knots and rewire, so to speak, the knots to our energetic body. And so this is very close to what we're hearing in the somatic therapeutic language, which is interesting. We have these blendings of ideas in different areas that are talking about the same thing. How does our body relate to our experience, to our emotional body? As I mentioned, the creative art therapy, and also sometimes it's good to have a spiritual mentor because you're sort of diving into questions that aren't really within these other topics, more about somebody that might understand spirit in a different way, or understand, maybe have some readings or some texts or some practices from different spiritual traditions that can help with that. Right now, we have kind of two main emerging styles that are happening with integration. We have the clinical psychotherapeutic practice that's happening with the pharma companies, with the clinical research, with the Johns Hopkins studies, all that kind of thing. Often they're working with the emotional psychological content. It's therapeutically oriented to facilitate our patient modality. Usually one-on-one, often it's talk therapy, that type of thing. And I don't know if you've seen this at all, but I've actually seen out there now that there is also artificial intelligence integration, which is, to me, a little bit dystopic. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. But that's actually what I've heard has been coming out there. And I think that's interesting because, again, like for me, integration is also about learning what it's like to be a human being on planet Earth, right? And then there's these people who think, oh, well, we'll just let AI help you with that process. What does artificial intelligence know about being a human being on planet Earth, right? So again, these are my biases. I think that it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. I think it would have to be a very profound AI because, it's hearing experiences that nobody's ever really put into the algorithm before. So it would have to be self-learning, which is also kind of weird. What is an AI that's self-learning transpersonal experience is going to learn? What's its consciousness going to be like in the long run? So anyway, but I heard that that's going around there. So that's kind of the clinical therapy, the psychotherapeutic dynamic. There's also the naturalistic approach. This is the one that sort of I really engage in more. So really, and I like this kind of idea, oftentimes we hear about it's medical, clinical, or recreational, right? And those two dynamics really kind of set up the non-clinical as being less than, right? Fooling around, high risk, those different types of things. So I really like this term naturalistic to really speak to these other experiences. It's not clinical, it's not psychotherapeutic, but it's a way that people have been doing it for centuries, millennia in some regards, right? So this might be philosophical or spiritual inquiry. This looks at it from a non-pathological framework. So, okay, it's personal and spiritual growth thing I was talking about earlier. Oftentimes it's cross-generational and peer-to-peer. What's really beautiful about the integration circles that we host is there's so many different people there from so many different backgrounds, elders that are talking about experiences they had, in the 60s or the 70s that they haven't been able to share before. Younger people who had just had an experience that gets to share and hear the wisdom from the elders in the group. So that's really, really beautiful to really kind of share this conversation from a lot of different perspectives. One thing that's nice too, you get to sort of, you might not hear this in the clinical psychotherapeutic paradigm where you hear this term often I've heard before is effing the ineffable, right? This idea that don't talk about the ineffable because you can't put your words on it, so just forget about it. Well, that doesn't work so much sometimes, So rather than saying that, let's say, how do we come up with creative techniques to really symbolize the ineffable? Ineffable really means it's so beyond ourselves, we just haven't figured out the language yet. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop trying. And that's another thing that's really great, and I'll mention this later, in the integration circles, is people get to practice new language. They get to come up with new ideas and say, oh, that really landed for me. I really resonate with that. You add this word and come together, and now I kind of get this. So we're in the process of recreating language around these experiences because we just don't have that language in our current reductionist materialist paradigm. And also a nice thing about it is you get to really engage in this ritual, ceremonial, spiritual container. And why that's important, and I think what is important about all of this is really, there's a way for integration to happen through a dominant model where they're telling you what the meaning is. But that's not really what integration is. Integration is about you figuring out what that meaning is. And so I think that's really important because at the end of the day, all the homework assignments, all the things that you have to do, that's up to you. Nobody else can help you with that. I mean, people can coach you and help you and that type of thing, but at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to be actually having to follow through with all of that. And so I had this little quote here. It says, what we decide to do for integration and what our life becomes from this are the new roots of our transformed self we are planting in the soil of life. We have to plant them. We have to water them. We have to tend to them. And if we don't, nobody will. And so this is the same thing in terms of integration. Have self-agency around your meaning making process. Make sure that you follow through on the homework assignments. Make sure that you're engaging in the difficult, challenging things that you might have to deal with that maybe you don't want to necessarily tell everybody, but you have those in terms of insights they had from the experience, and make sure that you can go ahead and engage in that process in a good way. Because at the end of the day, it's about your experience, it's about your journey. It's not about somebody else's journey and what they think you should make from it. So there's a couple different people often ask, when do I go and integrate? And I think Taji even mentioned something which I don't have on here, which is that there's also sort of the pre-experience. That would be like the intention setting. That would be like the focus on what you're looking for in the experience, which can also be part of the integration process. But I really kind of more focus just on sort of the afterwards here. So the first time you might want to start with the integration process, the meaning making process, is the next day. So yeah, following, or maybe even just following the experience. I know for myself, sometimes I write things down right after the experience. Okay, here's something I need to remember because these things are really ephemeral. They can just come and go, and you forget something really easily. So take some time the next day, journal with somebody, maybe share it with somebody, find ways to remember the experience. You can go back to it a little bit later. Then I would say like an integration circle or a one-on-one. You can do like a sharing circle on the post experience, and then the integration circles are the one-on-one, maybe a week or so afterwards. So you have the opportunity for everything to set a little bit. All the metaphors and the symbols are a little bit more landed in your body, a little bit more landed in your mind. You're able to speak about it in a different type of way. Then I would say, the following months, maybe even a year, as insights have time to percolate, that's also a good time to really sort of dig deeper. So there's kind of multiple layers. You might get the first layer of meaning, second layer of meaning, and the third layer of meaning as you dive deeper into this. I would also like to mention that there's a difference between the aha moments and the epiphanies versus the unpacking of the insights. So for example, you might have an aha moment of something you've been thinking about forever in your experience. You don't really need to make meaning of that, right? You need to sort of remember that. You need to apply that into the meaning making process has already happened there. Other times there's this experience insights that you have that you're like, oh, that's interesting. I need to look into this further. So those would be something where you would unpack a little bit more. So even in the experience, you might already be having the integration might have already happened in the experience from a profound aha moment. And then there are also could be insights where we need to unpack those more. This is what I call sort of the homework assignments. There's taking your insights, figuring out what those insights are and how you do apply them into daily life. And then sometimes there's homework assignments where you don't even really need to figure out how to apply them in daily life. The experience is very obvious, like for me, heal this relationship with this person. If you want to, have growth, this is what you need to do. Okay. So I need to go do that, right? So that's kind of a homework assignment. I'll tell a little story in a couple of slides about some homework assignments and how interestingly related they were to my experience and how they sort of help shape and influence some of my experience process. And the last one here is this idea of symbolic latency. And symbolic latency is this idea where you might have an insight that comes in, or a lot of people say, oh, all this information was downloaded into me, or I had these, I don't remember, I knew it was important, but I don't really know what it was all about. And this idea of symbolic latency is basically like sometimes these insights are planted or seeds are planted, and our job is really to water them over the course of our life. And maybe 2-3 years down the road, all of a sudden you've learned enough through the wisdom of your life, through the experiences that you've had, through personal and spiritual growth, that boom, that seed sprouts and that flowers. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's what that was all about. So symbolic latency means you don't need to figure it out right away. You don't need to figure it out within the month or year of what that experience really meant. Just keep working it, keep working it, keep working it. I'm still working with experiences that have happened over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and something will come through in a later moment. I'll see something that I wrote down and say, oh, that's right. So that's something also to consider. So as you can see here, there's a pretty broad range with the different experiences here. So right after the experience, the following week, the months and years, engaging in the process, and then this longer term process. So integration can be a long process, but definitely worth practicing. And sort of, I'll go into this next slide here. And why do you want to engage in integration? What are you doing? What's the point? Can we just go back and have our experiences over and over again? So for me, at least, it's, some things come to a better understanding of the nature of experience, the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness. That's one reason that I found. As I mentioned earlier, this idea of creating learning language for the ineffable, finding out new ways to discuss something that didn't have words for it before. This is the big one here that a lot of people want to engage in integration for, which is obviously personal and spiritual growth. That helps us understand what was going on. It helps us come up with the ideas that we might need to move forward to engage in this personal and spiritual growth process. And I don't know how many of you have had this happen, but I find for myself, when I don't integrate an experience, it shows up in my next journey and the next journey and the next journey and the next journey. So why do I want to keep rehashing this old material? If I go through the integration process, if I can actually engage in that sort of personal and spiritual growth, then the following experiences aren't dealing with that material so much. So integration really can help assist in your future experiences. This would be more of kind of like the intention or the pre-integration for the next one, right? Is like engaging in that process so you don't have to rehash it in that previous experience. Building community, I think that's what we found with the integration circles. That's been really beautiful. People coming together, sharing their experiences. Oftentimes you have an integration circle and new friends are made. People are hanging out together, and they're reducing that feeling of isolation that can happen from the profound experience. And then the last one here is sort of reciprocity and gratitude. So we want to sort of acknowledge that these are sacred experiences, that these are experiences that are deserving of reverence, and we offer gratitude and these types of things. So if we just sort of don't do anything with the experience, then if we believe, as I believe, that this is another plant consciousness that you're in a relationship with, then you're not really reciprocating to that. You're really offering gratitude to the experience, the insights that you have. So just to give an offering back. And then, further down the line, as we were talking about reciprocity to the community, gratitude to the community, showing how this transformation has helped shift things so that you can now go and help others as well. So this one is a little bit more in the theoretical, the next two slides, but I think it's really important because what I found when I was reading the literature on integration, it seemed like a lot of people had different understandings about where does it, not where in terms of the location, but where in your paradigm, where in your head do you integrate this information. So a lot of people talk about assimilation. Now, assimilation basically means digested into the previous world, for lack of a better term, right? So this could be problematic if you have somebody whose dominant worldview that's helping with integration, for example, is a neuroscientist, let's say, and they're saying, well, just assimilate that into your previous worldview. So what might happen is you sort of dismiss or devalue some of the sacred aspects of the experience. They might say, oh, that's a neurochemical, change. That's a default mode network. That's your frontal lobe lighting up. It's an optical illusion. All these different types of things. And so if somebody's like, well, no, I had an experience of the sacred, and you have somebody that has this dominant worldview that's more reductionist or positivist that doesn't necessarily allow for those other things, it's going to kind of dismiss that a little bit. So that's one thing. So assimilation, I think, would be good for experiences, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, experiences of psychological stuff, emotional stuff, these different types of things. That might be where a really great opportunity for psychotherapy can engage in this process. The next approach would kind of be this idea of accommodation. Now, rather than assimilation where you're digesting it into your previous worldview, accommodation means you have to expand your worldview to allow this new information to come in. And that's going to cause some shifts in kind of what you understand, but your core is still there. But this accommodation means you can expand and grow out and sort of bring that information in. There's other experiences which are a transformation. Your core values, your core understandings of the world, the nature of reality, of yourself, how you experience this issue are totally shattered. And now you have to go through this transformation process. You have to rebuild. And so in this regard, the integration process is rebuilding. You might find that core element is still there, that you still want to kind of work with that, but more than likely, there's just a lot of rebuilding that needs to happen, which is totally different than the assimilation or the accommodation process. Now, this last one here, I don't know what else to call it, so I called it Beyond, but this came up a couple times in my dissertation, and I thought it was really fascinating because for me, it sort of flipped integration upside down. Because the idea there, and this came up in this idea of the soul home idea is that like, oh, I went to the place that I've always existed and I saw my home that's always been there and realized that this world is just a projection of that. I'm here to learn lessons, not to integrate the soul home back to this illusory world, if you will, kind of this Buddhist philosophy, but I'm actually learning things here to bring it back to my soul home. So it flips integration. We're integrating our material here, our insights here, back there, not bringing that over here. So now it's very profound for our experience, but in terms of helping somebody with meaning making, that might be another thing that you come up with. That might be another thing that comes around when you're helping somebody with integration. So how do we help somebody with that idea? How do we engage? How do we help them learn? If that's what they want to do, how do we help them learn and gain these insights here so they can do things to bring it back to those other spaces? So that was something that came up a few different times, and I'll show this little chart here a few different times in my dissertation research, and I thought it was really fascinating. So these soul homes came up in unitive mystical experience and the transpersonal ordeal. Here is kind of a chart that I did. Here are the different archetypes of transformation that occurred in the research that I did. QC indicators or quantum change indicators. So these are these different elements that speak to sudden transformation. Here, this section are different insights that people would have. And this here is interesting, is this idea of the fully immersive experience. So it's not so much that you're seeing something anymore, like a movie, but you're inside of the experience and interacting with the experience and feeling the things and engaging with the beings, entities, and these different types of things. So again, that sort of questions our understanding of the nature of reality. So here is kind of the assimilation area, right? Here's some different things that, okay, with our regular world, I'm assuming, of course, here that this is from the Western reductionist materialist paradigm, where everything is kind of reduced down to these different levels and everything is kind of a mechanistic framework. There might be people that have spiritual ideas and this might change for them, but for our basic understanding, this here is going to be sort of the assimilation, okay, humility, facing fear of death, embodied energetics, ego life reflections, these types of things, psychological change, all these different types of things, they can be assimilated pretty okay within our previous worldview. There's a lot of expansion that's needed there. The next is the accommodation. So you're just talking about like past lives and ancestors, seeing those, learning about the chakras and serpents and things like that, seeing heaven or God for somebody that's a materialist paradigm, the sacred or heaven or spirituality could be, totally profound. Our bewilderment, this idea of new knowledge, initiations, battles, tests, different types of things. That would kind of be in the combination realm. Here, kind of a little bit farther out, we got the sort of the transformation of worldviews. So maybe like the immortality of the soul, which Ralph Metzner said is one of the more profound experiences for the human being. You realize that our life doesn't end at death, but it continues on. Our soul continues on. And for somebody that's in this sort of other worldview, that might be really difficult to sort of conceptualize. So kind of this maybe requires a little bit of a transformation of worldview. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's this beyond category over here, which we're still trying to figure out how exactly to engage with that with folks in terms of helping them with meaning making, or maybe we don't at all. Maybe that's the right way. We just have to figure it. We have to learn from them, right? So we're all learning together here. So so now I'm going to dive a little bit into the some integration techniques and practices. So you know, how do you sort of, you have an experience, you want to do some integration, what's some things to do? As I mentioned in the previous slide, you want to sort of identify the experience to integrate. Maybe you had a weekend or a week retreat of different experiences, and one of them was really one that you want to address the issues with. So sort of identify what that experience could be. Take notes, really trying to understand what the experience was, what were the things that were interesting, unusual to you, what were the insights that you had, those different types of things. This is for me, but it seems to work for other people too. Don't worry if you're an artist or not, that doesn't matter. It's nothing to do with anything. It means just try and use nonverbal language to paint, create, doodle, sketch out some of the aspects of the experience that you really can't put words on. Maybe some of the visions you saw, because those are really helpful. I even just saw, I was working with some packing some stuff around, unpacking some stuff, and I saw some old sketches that I did from a long time ago, and boom, immediately I was in that experience, and I hadn't thought about that experience for months, years even. And so there's something about that visual aspect that really can help you open up to that experience. Highlight any insights or epiphanies that are emerging. Those are things that you're going to either want to work with later, or things that you maybe will help you with your homework assignments. Write down any of the homework assignments and make sure that you finish them. As I mentioned earlier, I had this this one experience, which I'll just touch on briefly here, is I had this ayahuasca experience. I had these very difficult homework assignments that came up. I realized that, you know, they were kind of hard homework assignments, right? I didn't really want to do them because they were really challenging and difficult, right? And so sometimes it's really easy to say, oh, okay, well, I'll deal with that on the next round or some other time and these types of things. At the time, the person was calling weekly or monthly for integration circles, or for ayahuasca circles. He didn't know anything about my homework assignments. He didn't hear about it at all. 2 months go by, 3 months go by, 4 months go by. By now, I've forgotten about the homework. The afterglow's worn off for me. The homework assignments are put to the side. I'm not thinking about them. That's like the easy way to get out of the task, right? 5 months by, 6 months go by, 7 months go by. Still don't hear anything. I sort of accidentally do the first homework assignment, you know, again, sort of the symbolic latency idea. We do something and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm doing this thing, right? And I was kind of starting to get a little bit worried. I hadn't heard from this person. I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm just going to work on my homework assignments and this person will come when they come, right? 9 months go by, 10 months go by. I finished my second homework assignment. A year goes by from me hearing this person that was doing the ayahuasca circles. I finished my last homework assignment. I dropped the person off at the airport, was part of the relational challenges that I was working with and trying to heal. It was at 11 o'clock in the morning. I got back home at 12. And this is for real. At 12:01, I get a call. Ring, ring. Hey, we're doing ayahuasca ceremonies this weekend. So it took me a year to do that process. And the ayahuasca told me at the time, don't come back until you finish these homework assignments. I thought, okay, yeah, maybe I could. Maybe I'll just go ahead and come back anyway. And here it was, it took me a year, and just coincidentally, or whatever you want to think about it, I didn't hear about ayahuasca for a year. He was doing something else. He was busy. He wasn't even coming to Maui at the time where I was living. It took about a year. And then I finished that last homework assignment, and boom, it opened back up again. So the homework assignments are important, especially if you're having these relational sort of dynamics with these plant consciousness, with these plant materials, with these spirits, with the sacred. So really make sure that you engage in those homework assignments, which is really something I think is part of the integration process. Spending time in nature to reflect, getting rid of some contemporary distractions, these different types of things, you know, that might influence your meaning making process. Oftentimes, you know, we like to sometimes go and read a little bit about like, oh, okay, let me read more about these experiences, but give some time for you to really reflect on the experience, because you might read some experience that someone else had, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that was what my experience was. And maybe it was just like 2 of the qualities that were similar instead of the 15 that you had. So let the time to sink in for you to really get into your experience. And that could be, you know, hiking nature, being just outside and being away from tech and that type of thing.
Hi, Larry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? A couple of people are asking, what's an example of homework assignment?
Yeah, so homework assignment could be like, heal this relationship with this person. Another homework assignment for me, which I don't do other, you need to eat healthier, you know? So another thing would be like, breathe deeply, you know, learn to breathe more deeply. You know, these are the types of things you can kind of engage in these processes. And then when you engage in those processes, you can find that you can get into this personal and spiritual growth. So they're often the things that this personal and spiritual growth issues that you know you need to do to help heal yourself and your community and others. And they're just really difficult. So homework assignment is sort of a little bit different than an insight, because it's like, you have, you know, I try to put that sort of, you know, when you think about a homework assignment, you're always kind of like, oh man, they really want to do this. And so that's kind of the process. It's the difficult, challenging things that you might need to progress on in order to gain that personal and spiritual growth. And then if we can talk about that later, if people want to dive a little bit more into that. And then as the last one here, sort of body work, yoga, exercise, other techniques to work with the body to see what emerges. Like I said earlier, sometimes, you know, you can work with a therapist, or, you know, a somatic therapist, or a body worker, or a massage therapist, and all of a sudden your experience will come up. This happens to me as well with art. You know, sometimes even just like a particular line drawn a certain way, or a certain collection of colors a certain way, something will emerge. So you can really open up for that opportunity there. Now, what are some of the benefits of peer support and community? And this is just a little example of a circle we had a little while ago with some of the members at CIS. This is written up in Tonic on how to return to normal life after a crazy trip. I don't think there's ever really a normal life, but that's what we're doing. That's what they use the headline for. So some of the benefits of the peer support in the community, which is sort of the larger peer circle, which we'll talk about how to do in a little bit. It's an opportunity for community education. We're all learning together. So oftentimes people will ask questions. How do you do this? How do you do that? We had an elder in our community. She was about 65 years old, and she never had mushrooms before. She started coming to integration circles. She learned about things like lemon tech, and then she was sharing, which is like a way to wash the mushrooms in a lemon juice to like, so it sort of, I guess it metabolizes it a little quicker. So when you drink it, less nausea, and you can have an experience that hits a little bit quicker, hits a little stronger. So here she's 65 years old, doesn't have a lot of experience with this, and she's sharing with us all about her process around lemon tech. So we're all learning together as a community with, oh, this works or this doesn't work, this sort of trial and error, that type of thing. What's really nice is there's someone to hold you accountable in the circles. So if you do have, let's say you have an integration circle, and you mentioned that you had some homework assignments, and the next round you maybe won't do what I did, which was wait a year before I finished all my homework assignments. There might be somebody to say, hey, I remember you talking about this homework assignment. How's that going? And it's really just a way to hold you accountable to that process. Using discernment and intuition is really important, and everyone coming together and really sort of hearing the experiences, then we can help people, guide people together as a group. It's not one person being directive about it, but really about, discerning, is this what that meant? Or, people can ask questions about that. What do you think about this? That type of thing. And that's really, I think, an important part as we're going through integration, is this idea of discourse and constructive feedback. And neither of those things are judgment or saying this is what you should do. It's about, let's have a conversation about this. Let's have some constructive feedback. Let's talk about these experiences. Let's get a little bit deeper into what was there so we can learn more about it. What I found that's been really fascinating about the peer support for myself is that knowing that that community exists, I'm more willing now to go into my experiences a little deeper. Sometimes you're in your experiences and you see this area that you need to address, and you're just like, I don't want to go there, or 3 doors are there, and one of them is like this really challenging part of the experience. And you're like, I'm going to go hang out over here because I don't know how I'm going to have any support afterwards. I found that when I know that there's a circle, when there's things happening, I might dive a little deeper into my experience, a little bit deeper into the challenging parts, because I know I can share when I come back. So that's another aspect there. Maintaining integrity with the group and the experience, as I said, that kind of like ties into the accountability issue. As I mentioned earlier, this is an opportunity to connect community, reduce the feelings of isolation and alienation. And then oftentimes there's this cross-generational thing happening, right? So you have elders there, you have youth there, you have everybody talking, and they're all sharing their wisdom. And then the second part is even the importance of allies, cross-dimensional importance of allies, everyone honoring that these are plant consciousness. Again, these are the circles out here in the Bay Area. Maybe that's different in Ohio. I don't know. For me personally, I do think that there are these allies here, these plant allies beings. As you can see here, we have an altar. So we put, stones or things that are important to people or things that are special to people. We have some cacti there as well, some wachuma, and some sage and other things, really just kind of like be able to honor that there's a lot of allies that are non-human allies that can help us in the integration process. So what are some potential risks and pitfalls? So some potential risks of not doing integration and also some pitfalls of doing integration. So one thing to consider is that sometimes you have, you sort of crystallize like, oh, I know exactly what this is. I know exactly what this insight is. And you sort of crystallize it before these different metaphors and symbols are fully understood. And what that means is that all of a sudden you might be thinking that this is, insight A, and really it's, insight G, and you have to really spend some time to do that. So take some time. If you are working with people, allow it to be open. Don't necessarily finalize your understanding of the experience. Keep it open, keep it free flowing, that type of thing. As I mentioned earlier, there's a potential for passing on homework assignments after glow wears off. So make sure to do those, and that's part of the integration will help with that. Implementing before integrating, as I was saying, find those insights before you fully understand it. One thing I've found that could be difficult, and this is kind of a little bit more with the one-on-one, but this can also happen in an integration circle when you're dealing with people that are offering reflections, is this idea of directive integration. So people are really like driving point home. They really want to sort of get to a spot. And I've seen this happen with a couple of people, even some pretty well-known doctors out there. Well, yeah, okay, that's important. That's great, but tell me more about this thing. They're like, well, that's not really important, and I still feel a little trauma in there. I don't know if I'm ready to go there. Okay, well, that's great, but let's go back to this thing. And so the person feels a little bit like, oh, they can get a little bit activated in that process, triggered in that process. So really to not necessarily go towards this directive integration approach. I'm not sure how many people here have heard of the idea of spiritual bypassing. And this kind of like ties into the one below it a little bit well. The process can become self-serving or narcissistic. This idea is like, well, I'm having experiences, and I know I'm a spiritual being, so I don't need to do the work. Or I go to integration all the time. I'm making meaning of this all the time. I don't need to do the homework assignments. So you sort of bypass the hard work for the spiritual experiences, for the feelings of enlightenment, or for the feelings of expansion, if you will. Those are the types of things. This is a really great chart that I saw that kind of summarizes what I was speaking before. I'll go through it here, which is from IONS, which is the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And they're speaking more to this idea of this consciousness transformation model. They also are engaged in this idea of entheogenic practices and those different types of things, but they're speaking about all different transpersonal experiences. It could be, epiphany or mystical epiphany. It could be, an alien abduction. It could be all these different, death and rebirth experience, and near-death experience, these different types of things. So there's a lot of different ranges in terms of these consciousness transformation. So that would be kind of this noetic experience. And here they kind of have this nice little spiral here, and in the spiral they show moments where you can kind of fall off the process, right? So you have this beautiful noetic experience, and all of a sudden you're integrating with the neuroscientists, and they're like, that wasn't really spirit, it was just your default mode network, or it was just your excess of serotonin. So you kind of deny the experience, and boom, you're kind of off of this consciousness transformation model. Okay, let's say that doesn't happen. You have this noetic experience. Well, I want to explore this experience a little bit more. I want to sort of dive into it a little bit more. Well, then you kind of fall down the rabbit hole, so to speak. You're always looking for more information for that experience, and you're not actually then taking it to the implementation stage, right? You're just always integrating. Okay, let's say that doesn't happen. Let's say you explore, you find a practice that's going to help you with the integration process. You're starting with the implementation. Well, all of a sudden the practice becomes the end rather than means. So let's just be something like, when, I probably used to do a little bit more yoga, so I'm not necessarily saying anything against this, but you see this in a way, yoga becomes this process of like a fitness thing, and really kind of missing out on this whole other aspect, which is it's a spiritual thing. It's a sacred thing. It comes from this tradition that really talks about these other elements that are really about the body unifying and the mind, body, spirit, soul, that type of thing. So rather than just the practice of being a fitness thing, but like really looking at it from this larger perspective. So that could be sort of a pitfall that happens there. Okay, so let's say you don't fall into that pitfall. You now sort of are engaging, you know, in the full process. Your life is a practice. You're really doing well here, and then boom, all of a sudden it's only about you. You know, it becomes all about the person. So like, okay, well, I can't do this thing with my community this week because I have to work on myself some more. And you know, again, same sort of thing. You can kind of fall into this rabbit hole where you're always kind of working on yourself, always kind of working on yourself. A little bit farther down the line, you say, okay, you're working with the community now. You maybe changed it. They say the I to the we. You know, you're kind of looking at this. How do we work with this community? Well, this is a sort of the other direction, right? All of a sudden, you forget about the we to me, and this is where burnout happens. You know, you're working with your community so much, you're helping so much, you forget about self-care. You forget about, oh yeah, I have to engage in myself in this process. And so, you know, while you don't want it to become all about you, you also don't want it to only become about community, because that's how you sort of collapse and you sort of burn out in that process. Then from there, you go into this a little deeper, bring it to the community. And then the idea is that once you bring it into community, this sort of idea of reciprocity, and that's where we have this longer collective transformation. And as you see here, then in this collective transformation in this community, now there's all these different experiences, noetic experiences, where people are also going through this process. So the collective transformation works as a community and as an individual to come together. So I'm going to make these, I know these are important slides here, but I'm running on time here. I don't know, we have half an hour for question and answer, or I can jump over a little bit if possible. Yeah.
I'm available as long as you are. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyone else.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll do this. I might jump into the question and answer time a little bit, but I think this is important here. How do you create your own integration circle, your own integration community? One thing that, again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, people kind of get caught up in like, well, and we even had this issue at CIS, which is the school I went to. They're like, well, you can't do peer integration circles because you're not trained in trauma. You're not trained in psychology. You're not trained in psychotherapy, and you have to have these sort of different things. And so, so really like, well, let's talk about this as a peer group. Is it about sharing stories, about an educational process? We're all going to come together and learn together. We're not saying we're going to help heal you. We say we're not therapists, we're not counselors. We're all just here to learn from each other. And so that is really great, because this opens up this dialogue where people aren't investing in you to heal their challenges. We're all learning together and healing our challenges together. And so now there's this personal investment with the individual to come into the integration circle, to be able to share about their experiences, to be able to learn from each other, to be able to get insight so that they can go help their friends and family and community with integration as well. So really, that's kind of the framework that really helps for this. Like, sure, you might have therapeutic, you know, skill sets and maybe even be licensed, that type of thing. But this is really the idea behind these peer circles, is really to open up the floor for a larger community, and so everyone can come together and share. Typically, we limit our circles to about 10 people, 10 to 12 people. That's so everyone can share if it needs to. This is given the intro, the sharing, and the exit, the outro part. This is about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Typically, anything more than that for an integration circle is a lot. We found that anything really over 12 people for an integration circle is a lot. Not everyone has a chance to share, or it's so short you don't really have a lot of time to share. Sometimes you can have circles, and I'll mention this in the next slide, where people don't necessarily have to share. They can just be sitting and listening. But it seems like for us, at least, these 10 people, or 10 to 12 people is pretty good in terms of time frame. We also usually try and have 2 facilitators. I've tried to facilitate integration circles by myself. That can be pretty tricky sometimes. You know, we usually try and have a balanced dynamic. So for us, we do male-female dynamic, or just other balanced energies in the rooms. Those facilitators are able to sort of bounce off each other. If somebody has a really difficult experience and you don't know how to respond, somebody else maybe will respond. So it is possible to do it by yourself, but I definitely recommend if you can have 2 people to be there. It's just really helpful in that process. So, we also, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of bringing in the other allies, we ask people to bring meaningful objects on the altar, maybe something for the ceremony. Sometimes people will use like intention rocks or things like that, or crystals. So it's like they come up with their intention, but a lot of times in these journeys, like, how do you remember your intention when you can't remember your name? That's the thing that comes up, right? I don't even know who I am. How am I supposed to remember my intention right now, right? So what they would do is they would like hold this rock during the ceremony or this crystal or something that they've already kind of pre-put their intention in. And so somebody might bring that into the altar. So bringing that intention into the room with them. This slide's a little bit, there's a lot of information on this one. So it's a little bit small here, but some different guidelines we have in terms of the circle. We really want to be respectful of the circle. We want to make sure that the people that are in the circle don't get up and leave in the middle of the sharing or something like that. Just kind of honor that it's a container that we're all building and putting together. We all sit on the floor, so we're trying not to have people put feet up on the altar, all that kind of thing. Just kind of hold a respectful space. This is also because it's a naturally leaky container. There's 10 people there that may not know each other. They know each other by the end, but at the beginning, they don't know each other. So really coming up with making sure that people feel as comfortable as possible to share and be vulnerable, because sometimes these experiences are very vulnerable. So it's a good way to do that, just kind of be respectful of that circle. We use a talking stick. So whoever has a talking stick has the floor. We often don't really want to have any crosstalk that can just take time away from an individual, or sometimes you get into this question answer dynamic and people aren't really the rest of the circle, there might be somebody else that has a great reflection and their neighbor will share it. Typically, this one here, we allow about 4 to 5 minutes for sharing for each individual and about 5 to 7 minutes of reflection time. We found about 4 to 5 minutes of sharing is actually a lot of time. Some people are like, oh, well, only 4 minutes or 5 minutes, that's not much, but it seems like most of the people kind of run out of things to say when you have 5 minutes of uninterrupted time to share about their experience. Sometimes people do kind of like chip away at their reflection time. But we found that if we gave somebody like 7 or 10 minutes of reflection or of sharing time, that the reflections weren't so great. The individual was kind of repeating the same things over and over again. People would forget the different aspects of the experience when the reflections were happening. So on a larger time scale, it actually isn't the best. Now on a one-on-one where you can dive into it with an individual and talk a little bit more and that type of thing, that's maybe we're gonna want to have a little bit more time. But for a peer support group, 5 minutes is actually pretty good for that. And then, so we say, we do that. When they're done with the sharing, people can also say, hey, I'd like some reflections, or I'd not like some reflections. I just wanted to share this. I don't really want anyone to reflect. This is also a byproduct that can happen with a leaky container where nobody knows each other. Sometimes people aren't always the best, or we all make mistakes. And sometimes people might make a mistake and somebody shares a vulnerable experience. They don't want to open up the floor for somebody to like kind of stumble over a reflection that maybe can hurt them or re-traumatize them or have some sort of emotional charge to it that they're not ready for. So we just really say to people, if you'd like a reflection, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next person. Then after the sharing and after the reflection is finished, we just give a little moment of silence to let everything settle in, make sure everything's feeling good, make sure that, if it's a really emotionally charged experience, share or reflection, that there's just a space for it to settle in before jumping into the next person. As I mentioned earlier, no one's, if you have 12, 15 people in the circle, you might only have 8 people that want to share. That's totally fine too. People are wanting to listen, respect to listening is totally fine. Really want to sort of encourage respectful, speaking authentic truth from your heart, and really only referring to your experience. So, oftentimes, people will want to share their experience and their reflections. And they're like, well, is this your integration or are we helping reflect on this other individual right now? So really refer to that individual whose experience is happening. And then when that other person wants to offer their integration, they can offer their own personal experience. They might be able to say something like, we say, don't do advice, offer suggestions, that type of thing. Hey, this reminds me of an experience I had. I read this book, was really interesting. You might be interested in it. So that might be a good reflection there. That person, okay, they're relating to the individual, they've had a similar experience. They benefited by reading this book, maybe I'll check into it. Rather than saying, you need to read this book, or you need to do this thing, which sometimes people can be like, that's too much for me right now, right? So that's another thing there. Before we start the circle, we usually start with a short meditation, maybe a little like icebreaker, like, hey, what's your favorite tree today? Or, what's your favorite season? Or all the different icebreakers you can do just to get everyone in the right space and do a little meditation. Then we go ahead and, start up the circle. We really say to people, you have to be okay with, at least the facilitators, you have to be okay with comfortable, awkward and uncomfortable silences, because there's going to be moments where everyone's just sitting there looking at each other to go ahead and share an experience. But sometimes it's okay, because some people have different processes. Some are more introverted. Maybe it takes a minute before they're ready to jump in, where maybe an extroverted person is ready to go right away, that type of thing. So just be okay with the awkward silences. We have a timekeeper. That's really helpful. Set your alarm on your phone, because if somebody's in the middle of sharing something that's really vulnerable, that's really big, that's really emotional, you don't want to be the one to say, hey, your time is done, because they're like, ah. But if you have a time on your phone and it buzzes, then they know, okay, hey, this is my time is getting close. I'm going to sort of wind it down and that type of thing. So that's just really great. It kind of takes the pressure off the facilitators in that regard. See, and then at the end, after all the sharings are done, we sort of ask, how was that for everybody? What can we learn together? What did you learn? What was good? What was bad? These different types of things. And then we do like sort of like a little quote, or a little something that can, get people on their way. Sometimes we hold hands out here, everyone holds hands, we say goodnight, all that kind of thing. So really see it as a container. We open the container, we have the experience, and then we close the container. Really see it as much as possible as a sacred container where we're sharing our experiences. Also, another thing that's really important is that we want to ensure anonymity. We really have everybody speak to that during the, we have people raise their hands, and please, let's everyone agree that we're all going to be anonymous, it's confidential. Some people are there that maybe it's stigmatizing, maybe their job wouldn't like that they're there, all these other different types of things. So we really want to honor that in circle. So we ask everybody at the beginning to please raise their hand if they're okay with making sure that everything is confidential, everything stays in circle. Somebody shares a vulnerable experience, they're not, telling somebody else about it, and it gets back to them or something like that. So yeah, so that's our integration circle. So first part of the story here, I really talked about sort of the integration, sort of the theory. What is integration? What does it mean? When do you engage with it? What types of experiences might be coming up? Those different types of things. The second thing was more kind of the practices. What types of techniques can we get involved with to engage in our integration process? What are the pitfalls? What are the things to consider? What are the ways to do this in a good, positive way? And then the last part here, we really talked about how to create your own integration circles. So if you are interested, I know Taj is doing this locally, and I think we've been talking about this as well. I'm also available if you want to have any questions about how integration might look, how an integration circle might come together, those different types of things. We're going to do another event later in the year with maybe myself, maybe some other folks from Deep from Nature. We can talk a little bit more about policy-oriented stuff. How do we engage in the policy or the implementation of changing policy around anthogenic plants and fungi? But really, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I'm going to be open for some questions. These different types of things. I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk about it. I know that was a lot of information dumped there, but I think it was good to kind of give you an understanding of the theory, sort of the back behind the scenes of what integration is, because a lot of people talk about integration, and there's a lot of differing understandings of differing definitions. So I want to give you a little background on the theory, a little understanding of the behind the scenes, and also work with you a little bit on how to create those integration circles so we can come together in community. Thank you very much, everybody.
So Larry, there was a question in the chat. People were wondering if they could have the slides.
Yes, sure. I can send those to you, I guess. And if you want to shuttle those off to everybody, that would be fine.
Yeah, I'll share them to the guest list. Or
Okay.
should I just, let me see? Yeah, we can do that.
Great. Yep. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of information in there in terms of that. Some of that's from my dissertation and everything as well, so don't go publishing that because I haven't done anything with it yet. But yeah, you're more than welcome to see that, and I think it's good to just kind of get a sense of what integration is. So I'm happy to do that. Great. So if anyone has any questions, I could. I guess is this okay, Taj? If we just go ahead and have people raise hands and ask questions.
Perfect.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay.
or shower or whatever.
Shavika, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this talk. I think I've recently decided that I might be ready for an ayahuasca ceremony. So this is a question that's less about the integration and just more about advice, intention setting, kind of how to put yourself in a position to experience this in a good way.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, and Taj probably can speak to this as well. Oh, you work with Wachuma. Did you also do ayahuasca at all, or? Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
I'm open to other ideas on this too, because I'm also always learning. But I think that this is interesting screens here. Huh? It's great. So I think, one thing to be really, to think about is sort of this intention setting, and what does that mean? And the intention setting kind of woven in with also the dieta. Sometimes people are like, oh, well, this dieta, why do I have to take out my sugars and salts and no sex and all these other different types of things for these experiences? And there's, people that argue for it, people that argue against it. And I think like the traditional understanding is that, this is really to get your body prepared, your mind prepared for engaging in the experience. But I think another thing that's really interesting for me too is like when I'm in that dieta process, when I feel a craving, I think back to my intention. When I feel something that I'm uncomfortable with, or that's part of my other life, that like, okay, when I, don't do all those things that help keep me healthy, like eating junk food or whatever else, right? Think about it like, okay, what's my intention for this ceremony? How can I think about this? So that would be one thing, really follow the dieta, whatever the dieta is that the person who's facilitating for you will engage in. Oftentimes, sometimes for people go 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 to 5 days, something like that. So it's up to you. The longer you go, I think the more pronounced the experience can be, because you're really, your body is not really having to digest all the, or sort of deal with all those different sort of toxins of everyday life. You're getting right into it. I would say that prepare. I do for myself a lot of painting that involves visualizing. So rather than painting what I'm thinking or painting exactly what it is, I create a mess, and then I kind of look at it and kind of squint my eyes and I say, oh, this looks like a face, or this looks like this thing, or this looks like this thing. I found for me that's really been helpful in sort of helping me navigate some of the visual space with ayahuasca, because it can be overwhelming sometimes with all the visions happening at the same time. But really training your eyes to be able to see visions in a certain way, I think is good. Making sure that you're, if you are on any sort of pharmaceutical regimen or anything like that, figure out, talk to your psychiatrist, those different types of things about maybe having to wean off. You do want to make sure that you're not sort of contraindicated with anything that's going on with the ayahuasca. So if you are engaging in any sort of pharmaceutical regimens, just understand that that might be something you're going to want to work with, or sort of figure out your way out. Some of those you have to be, it takes a while, like a Prozac, for example, you don't want to just jump off of it. Or some of these other ones, you just want to just jump off of it. People get rashes, people have some psychological things that happen. So, you also have to have a weaning off process there as well. So make sure you talk to your psychiatrist or psychologist, or whoever is prescribing those to you, make sure it's a good idea. I would speak to whoever's facilitating the circle, the ayahuasquero, the curandera, whoever it is, to make sure that you're feeling in alignment with that individual. That's kind of really important if you get that opportunity to really feel into that person. Because you are, opening yourself up to a very vulnerable, spiritual, sacred space. I would say, prepare yourself, and maybe bring some little tools for, the journey itself. As I said earlier, the intention setting part is really important. What do you really want to work on in this experience, but also like having that intention rock, or having a little notebook. So maybe in the middle of the experience, you really got to jot something down. I've done this before. It's sometimes interesting, but I've looked back at some of the recordings and I've been like, but I had like a little pen recorder. Sometimes in the middle of experience, just say blah blah blah. Of course it's, it's like sometimes I think there's a story with Dennis McKenna where he was working with one of my mentors, and he said he had this epiphany in this ayahuasca, and I might be messing up the story a little bit, so I apologize. But he had this epiphany in his ayahuasca ceremony. He runs to the next room and he writes it down, and he comes back and he has his journey, and he's like, okay, I know that I wrote that down, right? And the next day, he's like, it's super profound. I'm totally gonna get it when I come back the next day. And like the next day, he looks at it and it says something like, "This is it." Yeah, what does that mean, right? So profound the night before, but here I am the next day and I don't get it. I had another experience too where I was writing something, and I didn't realize I was writing three-dimensionally. So, you have a two-dimensional piece of paper, but I was writing down and up and side to side and all these different directions. And so when I looked at it the next morning, it was just a bunch of scribble on top of itself. So that's why sometimes having a recording is good, because even though it may not make as much sense when you're trying to write something in that experience, it can be really tough. There's lighting issues, all that other kind of thing. So if you can do that and you can be sort of real quiet about it, just whisper in so you don't sort of bother other folks, that can be super valuable sometimes. There's probably a lot more. Taj, I don't know if you want to share any thoughts that you have.
There's actually a couple of apps that that allow you to record. I think one's called like trip.com. There's like a that they kind of will, well, it depends, like if you're in ceremony, maybe you might not want to do this, but if anyone is doing anything on their own, a private ceremony at home or something, they have like different, but I guess that's, you know, that's might be, but there's an option to like record, use certain playlists and stuff like that, so it can make it more accessible to you to try to record. But I agree with that. Like I was encouraged to write a lot in Ecuador, and it's just like chicken scratch. It's just like, you know, it doesn't make any sense. Like when I try to look back at it, I'm just like, I don't know what this means, you know. And they're like, make sure you write, you've got to capture this. And I'm like, okay. And I have this journal full of 7 weeks of like, I don't know, it's nothing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you. Any other questions at all? I hope is that good, Shabika? Do you any other thing you might have a question on that?
No, that was helpful. Thank you. It's
Great.
nice to hear from your experiences.
Okay. I'm not sure, is now the person that's on top asking the question? Does Benji want to ask a question?
Oh, let's see.
I'm not sure that with the way this format looks, if that's how the hand goes.
I have to take us out of this. I was just playing around and it like changed to it. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, it looks kind of cool. I wanted to just say that those charts were so helpful, because I know for me, something that keeps coming up for me in ceremony is ancestral and racial trauma that the women, especially in my family, have experienced. And it's come up for me several times. And so I'm wondering now, is there some homework around this? I know like a few years ago, I was called to create some like womb trauma workshops specifically for women from BIPOC communities, but open to all women, and I just never did it. And I'm just like, I wonder if there was some homework there for me. That's why it just keeps coming up. So that was so helpful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I would say, even if it wasn't a direct homework assignment, I think it's well needed right now. I know a lot of people out here in Oakland and other places are talking about this. How do we sort of open up to this conversation? So yeah, I think if you were to put something together like that, it could be really, really valuable for a lot of folks.
If you have a question, and there's a pause, just yell it out. You don't have to use the hand functions and stuff, especially if it's like you can't figure it out or whatever.
Looks like Seth was asking a question about the soul home.
Yeah, I could ask you. It's a kind of a cool idea. You've been working on a few talks now. I like that idea. Sometimes it really feels like I'm at home again. Just feels very familiar. So I was wondering, your idea, I like this kind of flipping something concept on its head, kind of. I'm thinking about healing, working on healing. I'm a healer. Maybe I'm not a counselor.
Are you muted? I'm missing some of what you're saying.
Everyday life.
Seth, you're breaking up on us.
We're bringing skills. Oh shoot. I slow down and repeat my question. So it seems like the idea was to bring, rather than concepts from our journey to our ordinary life, instead.
You're breaking up again. I heard ordinary life and then instead, and then that was probably the meat of the question. So.
It's breaking up.
Seth, if you try, I know for me, I'm supposed to have this super fast internet, but it's never fast. And so if I call in on my phone, it frees up some bandwidth, and then I don't freeze or have those glitches. I don't know if you want to try that real quick.
Or maybe even try, you can do turn your video off maybe and see.
Yeah, that works too. Mm-hmm.
Okay. How's that now? Is it sounding better?
Yep.
Okay, because you guys were really broken up on my end as well. So maybe I'll repeat most of that. The idea was basically something about, I like the soul home because it really feels like home sometimes. It's sometimes a word that gets thrown around, and I live at home, but sometimes it's very familiar on a journey. This is home, and it hits a lot deeper. But the kind of a fun concept, Larry or somebody else brought it up a few talks ago, was bringing skills from our ordinary life to the journey rather than skills from the journey to our ordinary life. I was wondering if we're developing this soul home idea anymore, if that might be bringing something like neuroscience. It's a particular perspective, but it's another way to understand the journey. Am I bringing skills like reminding myself in a journey to breathe, or I'm reminding myself my intention? That does help me focus. It's just such a reversal. It's kind of a fun concept.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that would be, this is a great question. What things would we bring to the journey that our soul home would be wanting to learn? If we sort of believe in that theory, then we're here to experience humanity, the life of being a human being, right? And so those would be maybe the things I would think about in terms of that. Maybe it is breathing, because that's something that we need to do when there's really deep breaths and those types of things. Maybe it's working with the body. Maybe it's doing poses or mudras or other different types of things that a human being body can do during the journey that can sort of help us access that, bringing things in there. Learning about your own personal life, reflecting on the things, part of that intention setting process. That's part of bringing you into the feeling as well. So I think those are maybe some other things, but it's a great question. Like what would we bring to a journey that is uniquely us, that we're trying to integrate there, versus bringing something from the journey back into what our worldview is here.
Yeah, it can sound so much like having a better trip, which is kind of a casual word to call it a trip, but in a way, yeah, how can I have a better experience back there at home? At least it feels like home sometimes. So
Sure.
Maybe even neuroscience or something. It's another perspective. Yeah, that can mean so many things, and it feels so much like home. It's just kind of like, oh, I miss that place so much.
Hey, yeah, no, I mean, I think that it would be interesting to see what our soul would think about neuroscience. Like what, I mean, of course, we're not going to know the answer to that question, but it seems like there's something that's being measured there.
Yeah,
But
right.
how does our soul relate to that? I mean, that'd be, again, maybe these are the things that we'll get when we die. When we die, we'll get all these answers to all these unusual questions and be like, that's it. So I think this idea of the soul home is also like preparing yourself so that when you do die or when move back to that soul home place, you have some of these questions answered, or you've at least pondered them, and maybe we'll get some insights as we go through. I mean, who knows? But yeah, it's a super fascinating idea to kind of toy with and play with.
Yeah, it's great. I try to wrap it up. It's yeah, maybe a life well lived. To
Right.
get beyond the insights that come from a trip. Yeah, I get lots of insights. I never get to quite that presence, that home feeling, that loving kind of feeling sometimes. So it's a fun dialogue to continue.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you might hear me say it in another talk as well, because I'm always trying to figure it out. So thank you for being okay with that.
Cool.
I've heard him say that before. I don't know. We're still working on it. Right on. Thank you, Seth.
So home-like. Thank you.
Now, Larry, is there like a mailing list that we can get ourselves added to? Because I'd like to promote your talks, like just at least mention them to our members. I mean, this was a really good talk, so that they can like kind of get on your circuit. Me
Sure.
too.
Yeah. I mean, if you contact ERIE at erievision.org, I'll put that in the little chat box. I did have like a newsletter I was doing for a while, but that got a little clunky. Right now, it's probably our Instagram is probably a space that I'll put most of those. So at ERIE Vision. Oops, that's not right. At ERIE, that's the one. At ERIE Vision for the Instagram, or on our meetup site. So we have a meetup just like you do, ERIE Vision. Just look that up, and we'll try and post everything at least on the meetup and at least on our social media platforms, Facebook or Instagram. Newsletters, with everything going on with Deep from Nature and ERIE, it's kind of hard to also put the newsletter together, but I'm trying to find some space to be able to do that, because I think that's good. You can expand a little bit more into, sort of what's going on and what new things are coming up. I think I see somebody raising your hand, but was she saying goodbye? Maybe she disappeared. Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Camilla.
So Larry, were you pretty involved with the Ann Arbor initiative for the Fungi Awareness Month? And
Yes.
how did that the rally go that you had there?
The rally was great. That was, I think we were all a little bit uncertain, because, Hash Bash is a lot of people smoking and, celebrating and that type of thing. It started off initially as a, an advocacy and free speech event, an activist event around cannabis decriminalization. But so we didn't know, was it like, okay, we try to really make it clear this isn't for people to, go and have experiences, although we did see a lot of people sitting in the lawn afterwards. So I'm sure they were doing great, but there was no challenges or people that were having bad experiences. There's probably 1,000, maybe 1,500 people that walked through over the course of the day. I know we gathered at least 500 signatures for the statewide legislation. Lots of great speakers, lots of great tables, great community. Everyone was open and discussing. And I know I'm going to be meeting with one of the people who started NPO Fest maybe next week. We're talking about, is there ways to do it in other places? I know there's some people in Pacific Northwest that were looking about doing something similar. So really trying to see how might that look if we were going to do that. But I think really the model of really emphasizing it's not a consumption event. This is really about sharing information. This is about activating people. This is about bringing people together. It's about sharing stories, those different types of things. I think can be really great. I was, pleasantly surprised. I think we were like, oh, maybe there'll be 200 to 500 people there total. And there was definitely, probably at least 1,000 people. I think they said at one point in time. So, and just to hear, some great speakers was really great. A lot of elected officials. The movement in Michigan is great. There's so many elected officials that are behind it, even more so than California and other places. For whatever reason, Michigan is really helping. So hopefully you can kind of jump on that train a little bit in terms of Ohio. That'll kind of influence what's going on down there. Hopefully so, but that was really great. The proclamation was actually an interesting thing. There's some backstory there, but yes, we definitely helped put that forward. The proclamation was actually something that somebody originally tried to do in April of last year, and they were out of LA. And I don't know, maybe that I won't say anything too bad because it's being recorded, but they're out of LA and they were like going around all the cities to try and do a proclamation, which in the proclamation was an advertisement for their company. And so they passed in Santa Cruz because nobody was paying attention. Ann Arbor was on it. They wanted to make sure that wasn't just, kind of putting this forth to advertise for a company that's out of LA and not really have sort of really the meaning behind what this is really all about. So they decided to talk to the city council to extend it to September and then change it from, I think it was Psychedelic Psychotherapy Awareness Month to Entheogenic Plant and Fungi Awareness Month. And so that's kind of how it came to be in September. But that was great. City council was behind it. They were supportive of it. They obviously want to celebrate, and again, the timing was weird because April, okay, we have, Bicycle Day and 420 happening in April, but how does this relate to Ann Arbor? So they wanted to do it when they actually passed their 1 year anniversary as well. So that worked perfect with NPO Fest with the 1 year anniversary. So thank you to the group that did put that forward at some point in time, because it turned out to be something great, even though maybe at the beginning we were kind of like, it's kind of weird. So, but yeah, no, this is, things are happening all over the place right now. And I think that's really great. I know in Ohio, there's where you're probably all located everywhere, but there's a team in Cleveland, there's a team in Columbus, there's a couple other teams out there as well that are starting to organize. So if you're in any of those places, or if you need some support where you're at, I'd love to help you out. And I didn't know anything about policy before I started this in 2019. And just like seeing it as like, okay, everything's really done for you. You write the template for the resolution, it's ready to go. We give you the educational materials to present to your city council, it's ready to go. I can be a clearinghouse of information from all the other teams across the US now to support everyone and give them wisdom in terms of, hey, this team over here did this thing, or, oh, hey, make sure you talk to the police chief because they'll be upset if it gets in the news before they hear about it, which happened in one of the cities, all these different types of things. So that's really helpful. And then we're also super available for meeting up with your city council members as well. You know, I think the city council members like that. They are like, oh, okay, well, this is a national movement. I'm not sticking my neck out on this one. This isn't something that's, you know, super, out of reach. You know, there's 9 cities that have passed. Okay, that, you know, this is something that's actually happening now. Maybe, and you know, it'll be a beautiful thing when we see this. It hasn't happened yet, but it'll be a beautiful thing when we see this, when people start, rather than saying, oh, the election's coming up, let's wait till after, where they say, oh, the election's coming up. How can I use this on my platform to get voted in? We're getting to that point. We're not quite there yet. So sometimes there is delays and things like that, but people are moving towards this sort of bigger goal. And I think that would be really eye-opening when we start seeing that happen. People able to put this on their platform and get the voice out a lot more, that type of thing. So I'm definitely here to help support however you need, everyone in Ohio and everywhere else. I see some folks from Michigan here as well, and Indiana. But yeah, love to help however we can.
Okay. All right, we took enough of your time.
Great. Well, thank you very
Thank you
much.
so
I really
much.
appreciated this.
No, we appreciate you. Thank you
Yeah,
for coming to
definitely.
speak with us.
Definitely. And
Yeah,
then
and someone
thank
did
you.
ask, Sergey asked how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'll put that put an email in the chat box here. And we can dive more into the decriminalized nature stuff whenever we do our next event. I'll see if also Carlos, maybe Akutsi or somebody else from the board wants to join, maybe Julie from Decriminalized Nature Ann Arbor / Michigan, because we helped them put together that statewide legislation that's going on as well. So let's talk a little bit more and then do a future event where we just dive into these deeper questions about decriminalized nature.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
But before you go, Larry,
Yes.
it's good to see you again.
That's
So much energy is happening in this space. I really appreciate your talk about ERIE and your unique approach to the integration side of things. It's critically important as we go forward, and the M109 group, it keeps debating this. We're going to move a lot of people through psychedelic sessions in Oregon starting next year, and some of the folks in the group are concerned about how we're going to integrate all these harmed, people, not harmed, but they're enlightened and they need to get to integration. And so you present an incredibly invaluable component of the post Oregon vacation trip. And so people need to integrate. We didn't have integration back in the day. You remember, tell people that. I was doing work before you were born, I bet, but we didn't have integration. That's why we lost out back then. So you bringing that subtle variant in, your little Fibonacci circle, that was golden. The wheel you had with the little tangential offsuit, it was really golden. I'm hoping you teach more people that.
Yeah, and that's the idea. I mean, we're definitely doing that in a lot of the cities where things are passing, to be able to teach people how to create those support systems. I think what's beautiful about this too is that even with an M109 model, you can create those peer support groups, even if they have to go to a licensed state therapist person, however that ends up looking, they can still do the integration in community. And so the more people that know about integration, I think the better. The more people that know how to support each other, the better. And then that just sort of ripples out into everywhere else. So I think that's really important. Obviously there's going to be higher levels of acuity, higher levels of challenges that people are going to maybe need to do one-on-one kind of stuff. But as a basic grounding, creating community, reducing alienation, isolation, having an opportunity to work through the experiences, peer circles are great for that. They don't, take a lot of time and effort. I mean, they do take time and effort, but what I'm saying in terms of, a process that can be enacted tomorrow if they wanted to, that's possible. So hopefully it'll continue on these peer circles. And, since we started in 2011, there's peer circles all over the place. So already there's been a lot of growth in this, but hopefully it'll continue on.
One thing I wanted to add was we had that come up in our integration circle where someone came. She only came once, but she was like a therapist at a ketamine clinic, and she was interested in making it more like a therapy session, a group therapy. And so I had to. I mean, I'm a licensed independent social worker. I have a doctorate in social work. But it's I'm not here as a professional. It's a peer group. And I had to make that really clear that everyone is a peer here. This is, this isn't professional help, in that sense. It's like we're all just people that have had experiences coming together, grounding, like you said, building community. And so it's just really important to keep it on that level too. And so, yeah, so we even had that come up in our group.
Yeah, and you're seeing that tension too, you know, and that's I don't know where that tension's coming from. It's oftentimes the hierarchical models that want to come and tell the peer groups you have to do it my way. You know, peer groups really going into those models and saying, hey, you know, this is too top down. You know, we need to deal with this. So, but I think you're right. You know, because there's just going to be a lot of work because you know you have an emergence of something new that's coming from that. You know, it's not like this framework that's been discussed and you know tried and true. And it's like you know there's going to be bumps, but there's also going to be really beautiful things that emerge from community that can only emerge from the natural sort of process of being peers, you know, not having to worry about, oh, should I say this thing or can I take the floor now? Or, oh, this is the person that's in power or, you know, changing the power dynamics, all that kind of stuff. So, so thank you for holding the line there. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions or no? Okay. Again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
you have his contact information in the chat, and then I'll send out the slides and then the half of the recording that we do have to all the people that registered for the talk. And I'm going to start recording them from now on. So thank you for that, Professor CK. All right, everyone have a great evening, and thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
everyone,
thank you.
have a great night. Appreciate it, Taj.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.